afternoon. I am thrilled to welcome our keynote speaker for today, TxDOT Deputy Executive Director Marc Williams. Mr. Williams is a licensed professional engineer and responsible for assisting the Executive Director in all phases of directing, managing, and implementing the department's policies, programs, and operating strategies. He supports the management of all transportation systems for which the agency is responsible to ensure that systems are adequate, safe, and constructed and maintained for the traveling public in the most cost-effective manner. Mr. Williams directs the agency's modal functions, which include public transportation, aviation, rail, and ports. He also oversees the department's efforts relating to occupational safety and work with disadvantaged, small, and historically underutilized business programs and activities.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this year's Texas Civil Engineering Conference. I would like to thank the Texas section of the American Society for Civil Engineers for the invitation to speak on what we've entitled a 2020 view of transportation and TxDOT. As part of our discussion today, I would like to cover the following topics. First, an overview of the Texas Department of Transportation and how TxDOT has been impacted by and is responding to some of the events we have faced this year. Second, a look at how the pandemic has impacted transportation in our state and nation. Third, a look ahead to the future, activities of TxDOT in 2021 and in the years to come. And finally, some thoughts on how we as civil engineering professionals who are involved in building and maintaining our infrastructure here in Texas and throughout the United States can be more effectively engaged going forward. So let's get started. So whenever I speak with an audience, I like to start off by saying a little bit about who TxDOT is and what we do. We are made up of over 12,000 employees who operate out of 25 districts around the state, as well as in our Austin headquarters. We are overseen by a 5-person policy board known as the Texas Transportation Commission. TxDOT's functions include operating and maintaining more than 80,000 miles of highways, which is more than any other state. We also carry more traffic on our highways than any other state. In 2018, our state highways had an average of over 772 million vehicle miles of travel each day. We have 55,000 bridges and bridge structures in our state, 27,000 more than the state with the second most bridges. And based on federal bridge inventory statistics, our bridges have some of the best overall ratings of any state in the nation. But TxDOT is also about more than just roads. Over the last 5 years, we administered nearly $800 million in state and federal program funding to support the operations of rural and small urban area transit agencies around the state. We also administered over $100 million in federal funding to support over 120 locally sponsored safe routes to school, multi-use paths, sidewalks, and bicycle projects in rural and small urban areas around the state. And we work with numerous stakeholders to incorporate and enhance bicycle and pedestrian elements on our roadway projects around the state. TxDOT administers funding and supports the planning and design for nearly 300 general aviation airports in Texas. From 2016 to 2020, we administered over $400 million in grant funding to help maintain and expand critical components of our aviation system. We have nearly 10,400 miles of Class 1 rail lines in the state, again, more than any other state. And we work in coordination with our 3 Class 1 rail operators to do inspections along these lines, along with maintaining and improving our rail highway grade crossings. TxDOT also has a maritime division that serves as the non-federal sponsor in Texas for the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway. They coordinate planning efforts with our deep and shallow draft ports along the Gulf Coast to handle almost 500 million tons of foreign and domestic cargo every year. Since 2015, our maritime division has worked with our ports to authorize $150 million in program funding to address landside port connectivity. So that's a bit of an overview of TxDOT. Now, let's talk about what has been going on over the last year, starting with what is most frequently on our minds, the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed a lot about how we work and go about our daily lives. But like each of you, along with the companies and organizations that you represent, TxDOT has remained committed to serving the people of Texas and meeting the state's transportation needs. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have continued to deliver on our mission of connecting you with Texas. Effective March 16th of this year, TxDOT's office-based workers began mandatory telework, and all of our office facilities were closed to the public. Because TxDOT has had a telework practice in place prior to the pandemic, the move to mandatory telework for office-based employees was not as difficult as many would have thought, and not an impairment to our day-to-day operations. Our information technology division enhanced TxDOT's network capabilities and provided increased support for employees working remotely. Daily safety measures have been in place from the onset of the pandemic to protect the public, our contractors, and TxDOT personnel working in person and on projects. We undergo temperature checks upon arrival at any TxDOT facility, practice social distancing, and wear face masks, especially when social distancing is harder to maintain. We've also worked with our contracting community to adopt shared safety principles for activities on job sites. TxDOT also quickly adapted by transitioning public meetings, hearings, and events into a mostly virtual format. This included conducting the monthly Texas Transportation Commission meeting telephonically and over the web when feasible to ensure transparency and participation by the public. Virtual options have also been provided as new ways for the TxDOT's transportation partners and other state agencies to connect with each other remotely in new and enhanced opportunities. This has benefited collaboration and information sharing. TxDOT has seen participation in public meetings and hearings increase in the virtual setting, as this medium provides more flexibility for participants. Training for TxDOT employees also shifted to primarily virtual means. This included rethinking how to onboard new employees safely and successfully. An exception has been our environmental public hearings, where federal regulations require us to have an in-person option. But we've been able to meet those regulatory requirements with a hybrid approach that also incorporates virtual opportunities for the public to participate. The pandemic effects have not been all negative. Due to below normal traffic levels earlier this year, TxDOT was able to accelerate and even complete portions of projects in our metro areas where traffic was typically heavier, and to do those activities ahead of schedule. We continue to monitor the situation closely, adapt to direction from state and federal health and emergency management officials concerning applicable health and safety guidance. Though TxDOT temporarily closed the lobbies of our travel information centers, the outside public restrooms remained open, as did TxDOT's safety rest areas, which provided important stops for the traveling public and commercial truckers. TxDOT's ferry operations have also continued. As the state began reopening in late May and June, TxDOT began reopening our travel information centers lobbies to the public with enhanced safety protocols. These enhanced protocols, which were also implemented at the TxDOT toll operations customer service centers, included plexiglass shields at the customer service desks and signage regarding the requirements for face masks. But the pandemic isn't the only issue that we have been responding to at TxDOT in 2020. Back in May of this year, at the height of the pandemic, a computer ransomware attack came at a time when many of us were working from home. The effect of the attack was extensive and required TxDOT to take many of our systems offline. Whenever an incident of this type comes up, it reminds us of the vulnerabilities we face in this area. Vigilance is particularly critical for those of us involved in the development and operations of our infrastructure, as it is for contractors and consultants that work with infrastructure owners and operators. There's never a good time for this, and our physical distances during the incident further complicated our ability to respond and recover. But in the end, we were able to successfully recover and walked away with some cybersecurity improvements that should help make us less vulnerable in the future. An important change we've adopted is the use of multi-factor authentication by department staff and other users of our information technology systems. Many of these security procedures can be a bit inconvenient, but not as inconvenient as a cyber attack. TxDOT is fortunate to have a very capable information technology division that helped us keep bad actors at bay and get us back fully up and running. But these threats are not going away and are becoming more sophisticated every day. And of course, as we have all seen in 2020, our country continues to have to work to make us a more perfect, inclusive, and accepting union. In response, TxDOT is taking several steps in this area. One includes continuing to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workforce. We continue to work to weave these ideas into the fabric of our organization and activities. As we do this, all our employees will know that they are valued in our TxDOT family. Along with taking a number of internal steps, we're also working with other DOTs at the national level through organizations like AASHTO to recognize that actions of the past in the designs, decisions, and construction of our infrastructure has often disproportionately affected neighborhoods and communities of color in a negative manner. And the legacy of those decisions persist in disparities that we can see today. So there is more work for all of us to do in this area. As we look back at 2020, and I know we still have 2 months to go, TxDOT's communications team recently prepared a video that captures our ongoing response to many of the things we have faced this year. And I thought that they did a nice job with it, and I wanted to play that for you now. So now I'm going to transition and talk some about the impact that the pandemic is having on our transportation system. Bear with me as we talk about some of these items because I have a number of charts and graphs to share that help visually explain some of the numbers I'll be referring to. TxDOT continues to monitor travel nationally and across the state, assessing the impact of changes being driven by the pandemic. These include impacts of changing economic conditions, more permanent remote workforce practices across all organizations, and changes in travel behavior as these factors relate directly to forecasting needed investments in our transportation system. The majority of transportation modes have experienced a reduction in usage and changes in travel patterns. I will try to step through some of these, so bear with me again as I jump into some graphics. First, looking at national travel from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, we can see how passenger vehicle travel, shown in the light blue color on this graphic, drops significantly more than local truck traffic, shown in the darker blue color, and long-haul truck travel shown in the yellow color. While passenger travel has recovered somewhat, we are still generally down by about 5 to 10% from normal levels. But as shown in the top green line in this graphic, the average trip has been slightly longer in length during the pandemic by about 5%. Perhaps people are taking longer trips by car as opposed to other modes like airplanes, and this added distance is partially making up for fewer overall trips. Looking specifically at Texas, since late June, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics reports that travel has remained steady at roughly 90 to 95% of pre-COVID index amounts, which generally is consistent with the data that we are currently seeing nationally. But congestion levels remain lower for the most part, and while there is still a little less traffic out there, people are traveling somewhat differently. As I previously noted, the average trip length that we are making is slightly longer than before the pandemic, and we are also going to different destinations. This graphic from Google shows how our travel destinations nationally are different than pre-pandemic conditions. The time we are spending at destinations such as workplaces and transit hubs remains down by around 30%. The good news is that we are still spending more time at the parks, which I think we could all use these days. Transit ridership has dropped significantly during the pandemic and has only marginally recovered, generally remaining down by approximately 50% year over year, as shown by this graphic from Capital Metro in Austin. Similar numbers exist for other transit systems in the state. Significant drops have also been experienced in shared ride services, commercial aviation, and rental cars, and these modes have still not fully recovered. For example, ridership levels and revenue on Amtrak's Heartland Flyer route were still only around 60% of their projected levels for September of this year. Interestingly, one area where we appear to be seeing an increase in travel is with bicycle and pedestrian modes. Looking at data from 21 permanent count stations around the state indicates that bicycle and pedestrian counts were up by 36% through the period from the start of the pandemic through May of this year. So, as I said from the start, our travel has changed during the pandemic, and we continue to see altered travel patterns. Looking ahead, there is still a lot to learn about how transportation will evolve in a post-pandemic era. What lasting changes will there be to our economy? Will e-commerce and small package delivery continue to increase? Will the work-from-home trend continue in the future? How soon will more people be willing to return to more crowded, large-scale events like football games, concerts, and festivals? How long will it take for transit, rideshare, and aviation modes to recover? And to what level will they recover? Understanding the outcome to these questions will be important to helping us ensure that we are effective in planning, building, and maintaining our infrastructure to meet the transportation needs that are so critical to supporting our economy and helping it to recover and grow. An area of significant concern for TxDOT, as it should be for all of us, involves transportation safety. It continues to be the top priority for TxDOT, and we had hoped that the drop in traffic during the pandemic would lead to a drop in fatalities on our roadways. But even during the height of COVID, when traffic levels dropped significantly across the state, we still did not end the streak of daily deaths on our highways. Thus far, in 2020, the number of fatalities that we are seeing on our roads in Texas is consistent, if not a little ahead of what we saw in 2019, when over 3,600 people died on our roadways. I don't want to pass over that statistic without giving us time to reflect on what that means. This is an average of 10 people dying every day in crashes in the state. Mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, daughters, sons, and friends. And unfortunately, 2020 could likely reverse what has been a 3-year trend that we have seen in making steady reductions in both the number and rate of fatalities on our roadways. Much of the continuation of highway fatalities through the pandemic has been attributed to perhaps drivers traveling at higher speeds due to less congestion. But a National Highway Traffic Safety Administration study indicates that there may be also other factors at play. This study noted that there was a significantly higher rate of drivers in serious and fatal crashes who also tested positive for at least one active drug. During the early days of the pandemic, drivers in serious and fatal crashes were 27% more likely to have tested positive for drugs or alcohol. Coming up on November 7th, our state may be marking an unfortunate milestone. This will be the 20th anniversary of the last fatality-free day we have had on our roadways in Texas. If this happens, then it would mean that every day for the last 20 years, someone has died on a Texas road. Let's take a look at this video to help give some perspective to what this date means. Despite this disappointing reality, we still believe we can have a fatality-free day in our state and are committed to reaching this goal and going beyond it, to one day being able to eliminate all deaths on our roadways. Last year, several Texas counties had 0 deaths for the entire year, which tells us the road to 0 deaths is achievable. But it's going to take all of us, each driver across our great state, to help reverse the current daily death streak. To this purpose, TxDOT is issuing a call to action to all drivers through the hashtag InTheStreakTX. As part of our state's campaign, we are asking each of you to visit www.inthestreaktx.com and learn about ways that you can help, and join with us over the next few days as we work to challenge ourselves, our friends, and our families to be aware of our own driving habits and to get this important message out. Now, as we are all aware, there has been a serious economic side to the pandemic. Our economy and jobs have all been hard hit. These impacts affect tax revenue that fund all aspects of government, including our transportation programs. When we look at transportation funding in Texas, specifically for TxDOT, it is important to understand how our funds are derived from different sources. We like to refer to them as traditional and non-traditional sources. On the traditional side, there are federal and state elements. Let's talk about the federal element first. These funds account for about 1/3 of the funding that TxDOT uses each year. Our federal funds come to us on a reimbursement basis in a manner that is spelled out by Congress through current transportation authorization and appropriation legislation. Some of you may be aware that we are working on a 1-year extension of our current federal transportation program, commonly referred to as the FAST Act. The sources of federal funds for most states include money from federal motor fuel taxes, which is 18.4 cents per gallon for gasoline, and a transfer of general fund dollars that Congress has had to appropriate to make up for the fact that the federal motor fuel taxes alone can no longer adequately support the Federal Highway Trust Fund. With the 1-year extension of the FAST Act for this current federal fiscal year, it appears that states will continue to receive roughly the same amount of federal funding as they received last year. At this point in time, there's not a clear indication from Congress that supplemental funding will be appropriated to state DOTs to make up for the loss of state and local highway revenues. Congress has authorized additional funding, however, for transit and passenger rail and aviation programs. The biggest issue for Texas at the federal level is the fact that we continue to be the biggest donor state. In other words, when it comes to getting our federal transportation dollars back from Washington, D.C., Texas is the biggest loser. As a donor state, we contribute more federal motor fuel taxes into the Highway Trust Fund than we receive back in federal appropriations. Other states get to rely on motor fuel taxes that are generated in Texas. And Texas essentially does not receive any of the general fund revenue that supplements the Highway Trust Fund, general fund revenue that Texans also help pay for. We can illustrate this issue with this informational graphic. Under current federal program funding, Texas essentially contributes $4.49 billion to the Highway Trust Fund in motor fuel taxes, along with additional general fund taxes. In return, we get back $4.27 billion and none of the general fund dollars that are transferred to the Highway Trust Fund. The fact that Texas is shortchanged in this manner is the result of Congress continuing to use outdated statistics to distribute federal funds to states. Statistics that essentially have not changed since 2009. This is an issue that we are continuing to work hard to improve upon with our members of Congress. In addition to the traditional federal funds, traditional state funding for TxDOT is largely comprised of state motor fuel taxes and motor vehicle registration fees. These are areas where we are seeing an impact due to the effects of the pandemic. In July of 2020, the Texas Comptroller revised the estimates for state revenues for the current 2020-2021 fiscal biennium to account for the economic contraction associated with COVID-19 and recent oil market volatility. The Comptroller downgraded traditional funding estimates for the current biennium by a total of $890.6 million. Funding estimates that reflect state traditional revenues that would be coming to TxDOT. We also have what we consider to be non-traditional funding sources at the state level. And these include what we refer to as Proposition 1 funding, which is derived from tax collection on oil and gas production. And there's also Proposition 7 funding, which is primarily derived from a portion of state sales and use taxes. In July, the Comptroller decreased the current biennium estimate of the oil and gas tax collections for Proposition 1 by $491.3 million from the previous estimate. Fortunately, Proposition 7 funding for the current biennium is essentially unaffected by the latest estimates from the Comptroller. With any revenue impact, TxDOT will assess our activities and future plans and adjust our programs accordingly. But to put these numbers into context, our total biennial budget was a little over $30 billion. So the downgraded estimates in state revenue sources from both traditional and non-traditional sources result in a decrease of about 4.5% of our current biennial budget. Looking ahead, we will closely monitor revenue information shared by the state comptroller. We expect updated estimates this coming January that will establish the budget scenarios of the 87th Texas legislature that will convene in January. Future revisions to estimates by the comptroller, along with any measures that the Texas legislature may take, could have further impacts on TxDOT revenues in the future. Let's talk now a little bit about future plans and projects at TxDOT. When it comes to upcoming projects, the plan for those is found in TxDOT's Unified Transportation Program, or as we tend to call it, the UTP. The UTP programs state and federal funding for projects and seeks to adequately balance the needs of the state. The plan addresses areas such as safety, congestion and mobility through the Clear Lanes Initiative, energy sector needs, rural transportation, and trade corridors, to name a few. UTP also distributes funds and reflects projects across our 25 TxDOT districts and also in our 23 Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or MPOs. Our MPOs have the important responsibility of leading transportation planning in our metropolitan areas of the state, areas ranging from Houston and Dallas-Fort Worth all the way to places like Texarkana and Victoria. Through the UTP, TxDOT strives to equitably balance the needs of different regions of the state. Our metro, urban, and rural areas all have transportation challenges that they are facing, and our commission works very hard to take those into consideration as they work on distributing funds and prioritizing projects in the UTP. TxDOT works to make the details on our projects in the UTP available through a number of online tools. Most of these can be found through TxDOT's UTP website that you can easily locate by simply doing an internet search for TxDOT and UTP. These tools include an online searchable version of the Unified Transportation Program, Project Tracker that serves as a gateway to specific project-related information, including schedules and project contacts with TxDOT, and links to additional data and mapping sources. Updating the UTP is an annual process that starts with updated financial forecasts that we receive during this current time of the year. I previously talked about some of the changes in the financial forecasts that we have seen. We then begin the process of working with the Commission to set funding levels in different categories of the UTP. This will take place in early calendar year 2021. Then TxDOT, districts and divisions, as well as the MPOs, will begin programming and aligning those anticipated dollars with projects, including proposing any new projects for selection or approval by the Commission. We then move through the public involvement, and this will culminate in the adoption of the new UTP in August of next year. So given the reduced revenue estimates that I mentioned earlier, a question may be, how might those changes affect our future plans for new projects in the UTP? First, it is important to understand that the UTP is a plan as opposed to a specific set of funding commitments. It is designed to be adjusted as funding levels change. While the current impacts are significant, they have not yet resulted in impacts that would force major program changes. These impacts may slow our ability to grow the program with new projects in the future. So we're continuing to press forward, executing our programs and implementing many important initiatives. In FY 2020, we let over $7 billion worth of projects. And right now, we have more than $24 billion of construction and maintenance projects currently underway in the state, the largest in our state's history. In July of 2020, TxDOT made $749 million in contractor payments with a year-over-year growth of nearly 20%. Our Texas Clear Lanes initiative is our statewide strategic plan to provide congestion relief through non-toll projects. It is focused in the Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio areas that represent our most congested regions of the state. These metros also represent 67% of the Texas population. Clearly, these and other areas of the state continue to need congestion relief, and we're addressing that need. Today, the UTP includes a total of $26 billion for addressing congestion in the state's 5 major metro areas and other congested areas in Texas over the next 10 years. We've made good progress, and there's more to come. Since 2015, we've dedicated nearly $25 billion for specific Texas Clear Lanes projects. This includes 6 projects that are complete, 19 projects that are underway, and 18 more that are planned with identified funding in the UTP. A critical part of our transportation system is moving Texas freight, and our highways are the backbone for that. We serve not only the long-distance transport freight, but also the very critical first and last mile movements that are so essential to efficiently getting our products from origin to destination. Much of this activity and many of the safety challenges continue to be in our energy-producing areas of the state. Over the next 10 years, the Texas Transportation Commission has allocated $2.1 billion to our energy sector programs through the state. These funds are distributed to TxDOT districts to address specifically identified roadways impacted by traffic in our energy areas. Additionally, the Commission has also authorized $600 million to fund specific highway improvement projects in the Permian Basin region of West Texas. As one of the world's largest oil and gas producing regions, the Permian Basin continues to present unique challenges for the transportation system. Challenges that endure even through ups and downs of energy sector activity. Increased truck traffic on the area's largely rural highways has stretched the availability of roadway capacity and driven up crash rates. This funding is serving to strategically address the critical needs in these areas. One of the most exciting areas involving our transportation systems and infrastructure involves the emerging and rapid advance in technologies that we are seeing. Cars and infrastructure are increasingly able to alert other vehicles and cooperate to improve the safety environment and alert humans so that they are able to react more quickly to hazards. These advancements hold the potential to eliminate or mitigate the severity of crashes, generating savings in lives, medical costs, infrastructure repairs, vehicle repairs, traffic congestion, emissions, fuel, insurance, and more. Connected messages enhance the capabilities of advanced driver assistance systems. And it's not just about cars. It's about vehicles to everything, or V2X. And the safety and efficiency and connected environment can improve for all mobility modes. Key to this is the 5G radio spectrum. It's an important part of the future transportation solution worldwide. Right now, though, there's a lot of debate in Washington, D.C. on the FCC's efforts that may result in reducing the spectrum from 75 megahertz to just 30 megahertz. This spectrum is important because to be effective, an autonomous vehicle must also be a connected vehicle to provide a redundancy of input for autonomous systems and to help the vehicle address some areas that autonomy alone would not, such as blind corners, fast cars from different directions, and hard to detect pedestrians and bicyclists. TxDOT is teamed with national organizations urging the FCC to advocate for preserving the spectrum for safety, connected vehicles, and connected infrastructure use. Texas is also home to a number of test beds, companies, research institutions, and governmental agencies that are helping to lead the way in the area of transportation technology and vehicles. TxDOT is central in bringing these interest groups together through organizations such as the Texas Innovation Alliance, the Texas Mobility Summit, the Connected and Autonomous Vehicle Task Force. And we are piloting initiatives such as the Connected Freight Corridor Project that is working to deploy connected infrastructure technology in partnership with our trucking industry within the Texas Triangle area, represented by Interstates 35, Interstates 45, and Interstate 10. This initiative soon will provide freight operations and drivers with information and warnings to improve safety and mobility. The system will provide warnings for traffic cues, work zones, low bridges, weather, such as heavy rain, ice, and fog, as well as wrong-way drivers. Technology-equipped trucks will be getting braking warnings from other equipped trucks, along with information on traffic conditions, route guidance, order wait times, and overnight parking availability. There is no doubt our transportation systems, both vehicles and infrastructure, are seeing rapid technological changes, more so and more rapidly than I can recall in my career in the industry. So there is a lot to look forward to and be excited about in this area. As we've been discussing, transportation and our infrastructure count. For our part, TxDOT and our partners continue to execute in our programs. And while there is uncertainty with the effects of the pandemic on our economy and our transportation needs, we have made strong progress and owe it to Texans to keep doing so. Texas population increased by 15.3% over the past 10 years, and the state's growth exceeded all other states in terms of the number of people added in that time. Texans and taxpayers expect that of us. Previously in our conversation, I mentioned Propositions 1 and 7. These ballot measures passed in 2014 and 2015 respectively, and they passed with more than 80% of the voters supporting them. These voters supported the need to make additional investment in our transportation infrastructure, a significant charge and mandate for addressing our state's transportation needs. Our infrastructure is a key component of economic development and growth. As engineering professionals and members of ASCE, it is critical that you are engaged with elected officials and other stakeholders, helping them to understand the importance of maintaining safe and reliable infrastructure that goes beyond roads and bridges. Drainage systems, utilities, housing, office, and commercial infrastructure, along with our environment. All of these areas are facing challenges in their maintenance and resiliency. With this election, there will be many new members of our legislature and Congress, many that may not yet have a full understanding of the significance of our infrastructure needs. These officials need to and want to hear from you, so it is important that you take the time to know them and communicate with them. We are in an important time and an exciting time, and a time that we are seeing many changes. And for over 100 years, TxDOT has been part of these changes, and we are looking forward to continuing to serve the citizens of Texas, now and in the years to come. I want to again thank ASCE for the invitation to speak with you today and encourage us all to be safe, both on the road and with your help. Our success is a team effort. Thank you.
Marc, thank you so much for your excellent and informative presentation. And at this time, I'd like to open the floor to a live Q&A discussion for like the next 20 minutes. Please type your questions that you have for Marc in the chat box at this time. And let's go ahead and get started with a few questions that I have for you, Marc. Marc, you talked about traditional and non-traditional funding in your presentation. How do you see the results of yesterday's election, at least on the state side, impact the future of transportation?
I didn't get the audio from Rob if he said something.
Oh, you know what? Let me start again. Let me repeat the question. Marc, you talked about traditional and non-traditional funding in your presentation.
I'm not getting audio on my end.
Oh,
my audio
okay.
is cut.
One moment as we get you connected.
I think they're working on my audio, Susan. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, nod your head. Okay. Well, while they're doing that, I think one of the first questions we had talked about, speaking about, and first of all, let me say thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today and to be part of this conversation with ASCE, and thank your members as well. One of the questions that I think we were wanting to tackle first is really just kind of where we are right now from an election standpoint. And there are really two aspects to that. There is the federal side and the state side, as I talked about in the presentation. On the federal side, still some things up in the air. Obviously, the presidential election starting to get a little bit more clear, but it looks like it may be a change in the presidency, and it looks like it may be maintaining the Senate in Republican control. And so what that kind of means to us is that there may not be a big change in some of the legislation. There might not be a huge rollback in different types of transportation legislation or a change in just kind of the status quo. The Senate tends to be a bit more stable on those things. The thing that we're hoping for is now that the election is behind us, that at the federal level, we'll see an effort to move forward with reauthorization of the transportation funding legislation that I spoke of earlier. On the state side, things seem to be a little bit more clear. There were a number of races. There was a lot of talk about, potentially, if there were a blue wave, the Democrats taking over the state House of Representatives. That hasn't happened. A lot of the incumbent seats remained in the hands of the incumbent or in the hands of the party. There were a couple of pickups on the House side and maybe one or two on the Senate side for Democrats, but not enough to substantially change the balance of power. So I think what you're going to continue to see is that the House and Senate will continue to remain in Republican hands, and a lot more kind of maintenance of the status quo from a transportation standpoint. I think the biggest issue is really going to be dealing with the effects of the pandemic and the economic impacts of that, and then how that may have an effect on transportation funding going forward. And I referenced some of that in my speech.
Mark, thank you. And I appreciate you acting as both the presenter and a moderator there for a moment. So hopefully, I think we've got our audio issue resolved. Going back, though, to your presentation about traditional and non-traditional funding, though, how do you see Proposition 1 and 7 impacted by COVID and the reduction in travel, along with the price and use of oil and gas?
So still, I want to apologize. I'm still having trouble with audio on my end, but I'm also able to kind of see what the questions are, and talking a little bit about the impacts that we may continue to see as far as Prop 1 and Prop 7 are concerned. As I noted, our economy and jobs have been hard hit by COVID, especially in our energy sector. Many of you all may remember back in April when the first wave of the pandemic really set in and the economy shut down, the price of oil went negative. Less travel means less consumption of motor fuels, which in turn means less state and federal funding for transportation. To the new year will be what Comptroller Hager will say about what his revenue estimate is for the biennium. Prop 1 funding is based on oil and gas production tax collections, and earlier this year the comptroller lowered his estimates in that area, and we've also, as I mentioned, seen a reduction in automobile vehicle travel. And some of that, it takes a little while for us to really see what the implications of that are, just because of how they collect motor vehicle fuels taxes and how that's in turn reported to the comptroller, and then also reported at the federal level for the federal motor fuels tax collection. So still a lot of caution ahead, and I do expect that that you're going to continue to see some tightening, not only within our budgets at the TxDOT level, but also across the board with the state of Texas. The one thing that I think we'll continue to be looking for is whether or not Congress, when they reconstitute themselves, or maybe even during the lame duck period now that the election is over, whether or not they'll take some constructive steps toward passing an additional COVID relief measure that may have funding included in it for both the highway side as well as what they've already done previously with public transit and aviation. Both of those modes got an infusion of funds from the first CARES Act, and they may stand to get additional. Highways has not gotten anything yet, and so there's certainly a need out there, and it'll be interesting to see what Congress does going forward.
That's so interesting, Mark. And those are some interesting points as well. I hope, can you hear me at this time as far as the audio goes?
Yeah, so, I tell you, as I talked about some in the presentation, things are really changing rapidly in our industry. They were changing rapidly before we got into this pandemic. We already saw have seen, significant moves in the area of automation and automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles, getting there. I think it's going to take a little longer to really get to the point where we're fully autonomous, so to speak, but we're starting to see those incremental changes in many aspects of our transportation system and in our communication side of the transportation system, the ability of our infrastructure to talk to motorists and motorists to talk to infrastructure. And I think that's the one aspect that we're going to see a lot more of, rapidly evolving that in the years to come. In terms of just how people travel, as I mentioned, it's changing, and it's going to really be interesting to see how we come out of the pandemic, how people return to normal operations and their way of going about doing business and their way about going about work, and how much that may change, and then begin to start to determine how that affects us as we go through and plan and design and develop our transportation systems going forward. It's a real dynamic change, and we have to really continue to work collectively and collaboratively, not just with TxDOT, but realize too that we work with cities and counties and metropolitan planning organizations around the state. And it's really a collaborative effort to understand where we are from a planning standpoint, a need standpoint, and where we need to go in the future to best serve our transportation system and improve our economic activity here in the state of Texas.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you kind of touching on that aspect. And I do have one question from the audience as far as from the attendees. And it says, can you,
as we showed in the presentation, we're coming up on what really is a terrible milestone, which is on November 7th. That'll be 20 consecutive years of days that we have had a fatality on our roadways here in Texas, and it's really a tragedy. Over 70,000 deaths, and not only TxDOT, but cities and counties and a lot of entities that are involved in transportation around the nation have set what we consider to be a vision zero, if you will, and looking to that day and setting that expectation that accepting fatalities on our roads is not something that is where we want to be. We want to be not only eliminating or reducing them, but getting to the point where we're eliminating those fatalities. And so, it's not only a commitment on our end, it's a commitment with other stakeholders, and it really takes a collaborative effort to succeed in this area. We talk often on the engineering side about the 3 E's when it comes to highway safety, and that's engineering and education and enforcement. And that talks somewhat that it's not just about what we can do here at TxDOT. We can address the engineering and the education side to a degree. The enforcement side, we rely upon our partners with the police and law enforcement to help in that area. But a real key component that I think it's not immediately reflected in those 3 E's, but it's the responsibility that we all have as drivers and motorists on our roads, that we have a responsibility to look out for what we're doing and to help look out for our fellow travelers on the roadway. Well over the vast majority of our fatal accidents, fatal crashes that occur on our highways, upwards of 90% have some component of human error that's involved in those those crashes. And so as we try to work hard to educate and inform folks, we're trying to make sure that everybody knows that we need to be accountable for those, for ourselves and for others, if we're going to be successful in achieving that Vision Zero. It's a vision that we all have to share.
Thank you, Mark. And you know what? We have another question that was really great to hear. Can you please cover the current slowdown and postponement of numerous consultant contracts? That's one of the questions in the chat box.
Sure, I know. I'd be happy to talk to that some. What we've seen is about 3 to 4 years worth of acceleration and ramp up in our consultant and professional engineering procurement activity around the state. And we've ramped up to the part where we're at about $1 billion a year in professional services activity, which is great. And where we are now is we have to balance and manage that going forward. And we're not looking at cancellation or anything like that. I think one of the areas, and Bill Hale and our engineering operations folks have spoke to some in the industry on this today even, is that we need to work with our districts to improve communication and expectation with the industry about where we're at going forward. And it's kind of a two-way street between both industry and TxDOT on communication and expectation. But it's really, as I mentioned, it's about this transition from this acceleration and ramp up. We're trying to get as much projects into the system as we can, to balancing and managing that going forward, and managing in a way that responds to and understands the important partnership that we have with industry, who help us deliver our transportation program every year to help us get projects ready to construction, but doing that in a manner that realizes that we have to have a stable program where not only are we balancing and managing things on within the professional engineering activities, but also in context with the other things that we have to do to deliver projects. And that includes where we are with right-of-way acquisition and utility relocations. That has a significant budget impact. And then the actual construction activities themselves. We have a construction program that we maintain that includes design, build, and design bid build activities that are between $6 to $7 billion a year going forward. And we need to maintain a balance across the board with all of those activities as well.
I appreciate you touching on that. And I know that's something that's on a lot of the, members, attendees' mind about TxDOT. But there's another question that's in the chat box. It says, how is senior TxDOT leadership encouraging TxDOT districts to use and implement strategies such as transportation, systems management, and operations?
Well, that's a great question. When we're talking about strategies for improving our transportation system, we're really seeing that a lot of the effective tools that we have out there are things such as transportation systems management strategies and operations, and being efficient in how we manage and operate our transportation system. And some of that is really helping to communicate with drivers the status of our transportation network so that they can make choices and understand how they may want to manage their driving behavior to hopefully avoid congestion. And so we continue to work through our traffic operations and safety division to really set standards and put those standards in place, and to coordinate with our districts on implementing those and incorporating those within our engineering and project development activities. I think one area that we're really seeing a significant focus on that has been in the Project Clear Lanes initiative that I spoke about, where we're really trying to focus on addressing congestion in our urban areas. And a key part of that is being able to effectively manage it and effectively manage the operations of those key facilities.
I think we have time for at least one more question. And the question we have is, what sort of paradigm shift is being considered for re-engineering infrastructure to make local, city-level intersections safer?
Well, what we really have to do when we're looking at our infrastructure is deal with the re-engineering and redevelopment of that infrastructure in a way, as you asked, to make it safer. And the cities and local governments have a key part of that. One of the areas that we do work with them on is we have a safety program that we administer through to our districts to really focus on pedestrian safety and bicycle safety components and to engineer those into what we're doing. We're seeing the most significant rise in fatalities over the past several years has been in pedestrian and bicycle incidents. And often trying to address those comes through relooking at how our infrastructure has been designed and how people are changing their habits, and us needing to work with our cities and counties to adapt maybe how we're doing signing and striping and operating our traffic signals in a way that makes it safer for all users of our transportation system.
Oh, Mark, this is wonderful. I'm sorry we are out of time now for this Q&A session, but thank you so very much for your time, and we really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you. I'm still not getting audio, so and I apologize for that. But if this is our wrap up, I'd just like to say to you, Susan, and to ASCE and the members who were part of this today, that we certainly do appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and to talk with you all about not only where we are within TxDOT, but really where we hope, potentially we're going as a transportation industry. It's a partnership, as I mentioned before, and really appreciate what you and your members do to help us improve the infrastructure in the state of Texas.
Thank you so very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Mark, thanks again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for CECON 2020. We have a small token of appreciation for you for your time, remarks, and insights today. Please keep an eye on your mailbox in the coming weeks, and thanks so much again.